They threw an alien girl to the monsters, until a human hero stepped in HFY Story. The colony world of Carthve was quiet in the way only fearful places were quiet. Tall stone buildings curved toward the gray sky, and long banners of the Virelian coalition hung from metal towers. The banners showed symbols of unity and order, but everyone knew what truly kept the peace here. The pit. It was a massive canyon carved into the planet's surface, so deep that no one could see the bottom. Warm air rose from it in slow waves, carrying a low vibration that could be felt in the bones. The people of Carthve gathered around it in silence, standing in neat lines as soldiers guided them into place. No one cried. No one protested. They had learned long ago that resistance only made things worse. At the edge of the pit stood a small figure bound with glowing restraints. Her name was Saralyn. She was young by her species standards, with pale blue skin and faint light patterns along her arms that flickered when she was afraid. Her large dark eyes moved across the crowd, searching for something, anything, that looked like hope. She found none. Her species was small, gentle, and politically weak. When the coalition needed an offering, they were always chosen first. Saralyn did not scream. She had already cried until there were no tears left. She stood still because she had been taught that dignity was the only thing the coalition could not take away. High above the pit, a Virelian official began to speak, his voice amplified and cold. By ancient law, this offering satisfies the balance. The devourers will feed and the colony will remain safe. The word devourers made the crowd stiffen. Everyone knew the stories. Enormous biomechanical creatures older than most civilizations. They lived in the pit, emerging only when fed. No weapon had ever killed one. No armor had ever stopped them. The coalition claimed they controlled the monsters, but everyone knew the truth. They did not control them. They paid them. The guards pulled Saralyn closer to the edge. The heat from below made her skin tingle. She could hear something moving far beneath the stone, slow, heavy, patient. Somewhere beyond the colony walls, far from the gathered crowd, a damaged human ship rested in a shallow crater. It had fallen from the sky 2 days earlier. Captain Elias Ward crouched beside the ship's torn hull, wiping dust from his face. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and clearly exhausted. His survival suit was scratched and scorched, and one sleeve was sealed with emergency tape. The ship systems were mostly dead. Long-range comms were gone. Engines were useless. But Elias was alive. That alone meant the crash had failed. He had spent the last 2 days scavenging parts, mapping the area, and trying to avoid being noticed. Humans were not exactly welcome in coalition space. They were considered unpredictable, emotionally unstable, and not worth the trouble. Usually that meant they were ignored. Elias preferred it that way. He had climbed a ridge overlooking the colony to scout for supplies when he noticed the crowd. At first he thought it was a festival, then he saw the soldiers, then he saw the pit, and finally he saw the girl. Elias lowered his scanner slowly, his jaw tightening. He had seen executions before, pirates, slavers, war criminals. He told himself this was not his business. He was alone, injured, and stranded in hostile territory. Then he watched the guards tighten the restraints around Saralyn's arms. He watched her stumble near the edge, and something inside him refused to stay quiet. Through his scanner, he picked up energy readings from deep within the pit, massive heat signatures, movement patterns that made no sense for natural creatures. Whatever lived down there was not just dangerous, it was engineered to kill. Elias whispered a single word: "No." Below, the official raised his hand. The crowd bowed their heads. The guards shoved. Saralyn fell. For a moment, there was only the sound of wind rushing past her ears as she dropped into darkness. The sky disappeared above, replaced by jagged stone walls streaked with glowing veins of alien energy. Her restraints sparked as they scraped against rock. She hit a ledge hard, pain exploding through her side. The restraints broke apart, freeing her arms, but she barely noticed. She rolled to the edge, coughing, terrified that the fall was not over. Then she heard it. A deep, metallic growl echoed through the pit, vibrating the stone beneath her. Something moved below her ledge, something huge. She scrambled backward, her heart racing. She had been told the devourers killed instantly. That fear would only last seconds, but the seconds stretched. Above the pit, the crowd waited for the usual sounds, the scream, the roar, the silence afterward. Instead, alarms began to ring. On the ridge, Elias was already moving. He did not think about plans or politics. He thought about distance, timing, and gravity. He fired his grappling launcher into the pit wall, checked the tension, and jumped. The wind tore at him as he descended. The pit walls rushed past in a blur of stone and glowing veins. He adjusted his angle, firing a second grappling line to slow his fall. Below him, something massive shifted. Elias landed hard on the ledge, rolling to absorb the impact. He came up on one knee, weapon raised. Saralyn stared at him in disbelief. He was tall, wrapped in dark armor marked with strange symbols. His helmet visor glowed faintly, hiding his eyes. He looked nothing like the monsters she had imagined would come for her. "Don't move," Elias said calmly, his voice steady despite the chaos. "I've got you." She did not understand his language, but his tone was clear enough. The devourer emerged from the shadows. It was enormous, its body a mix of metal plates and living tissue, glowing eyes set deep within an armored skull. Its limbs unfolded with mechanical precision, claws scraping against stone as it climbed toward the ledge. Above, the crowd erupted into panic. "A human!" someone shouted. "Why is there a human in the pit?" Coalition commanders barked orders, trying to shut down the feed, but it was too late. Sensors throughout the pit were already transmitting data. Every movement was being recorded. The devourer roared and lunged. Elias fired. The kinetic round slammed into the creature's shoulder, not killing it, but staggering it. Elias grabbed Saralyn's arm and pulled her behind a rock outcropping as claws slammed into stone where she had been seconds earlier. "Stay close," he said, even though he knew she might not understand, "and do exactly what I do." The devourer adapted quickly, adjusting its movements, its eyes tracking Elias with unnatural focus. It had learned from thousands of kills, but it had never hunted a human. Elias moved differently. He did not charge or flee blindly. He observed. He waited. When the devourer struck again, he leapt sideways, using the pit wall to change direction midair. The creature missed. Saralyn watched, fear slowly mixing with something unfamiliar. Hope. Above the pit, silence fell again, but this time it was not respectful. It was shocked. The ritual was broken, and for the first time in the history of the Coalition, the monsters did not have complete control of the pit. Far below the surface, a human had stepped in. And everything was about to change. The devourer did not rush again. It circled the ledge slowly, its heavy claws digging into the stone as if testing the ground. Its glowing eyes stayed locked on Elias. It was learning. It always learned. Elias knew that pause was dangerous. He pulled Saralyn closer behind him and pressed his back against the rock wall. The pit was wider here, opening into a vast chamber below. Broken platforms and ancient structures clung to the sides, remains of failed attempts to control what lived here. Heat rose from the depths in slow waves, making the air thick and hard to breathe. Saralyn trembled. She had never been this close to a devourer. No one survived long enough to describe them. Yet here she was, alive, with a strange armored being standing between her and death. The devourer moved first. It launched itself forward with terrifying speed. Elias fired again, aiming for a joint this time. The round cracked against metal and flesh, forcing the creature to twist midair. Its claws slammed into the ledge, tearing stone loose. The ground shook, and pieces of rock fell screaming into the darkness below. Elias grabbed Saralyn and ran. They sprinted along the ledge as the devourer followed, its massive body somehow agile despite its size. Elias fired grappling lines ahead of them, pulling them across gaps that would have been impossible for most species to cross. Above, coalition observers watched in disbelief. No one had ever moved through the pit like this. Most offerings froze or ran in straight lines until they were caught. The human moved like the pit was a problem to be solved, not a fate to be accepted. Saralyn struggled to keep up, her legs burning. She stumbled and Elias caught her without slowing, lifting her slightly so she could keep moving. The devourer roared again, frustrated. They reached a narrow bridge of stone leading to a wider platform. Elias skidded to a stop and turned, raising his weapon. He fired multiple shots in quick bursts, not to kill, but to distract. The devourer raised one armored limb to shield its eyes. That was when Elias triggered the charge. The explosion shattered part of the bridge, sending debris crashing into the pit. The devourer lost its footing and dropped, claws scraping wildly as it fell out of sight. Saralyn collapsed to her knees, gasping. She expected relief, but Elias did not relax. He scanned the area, his posture tense. "It's not dead," he muttered. "They're never that easy." As if answering him, the pit shook. A second devourer emerged from below, larger than the first. Its eyes glowed brighter, its movements more precise. The first one reappeared moments later, climbing with renewed anger. Two of them now. Above the pit, panic spread through the crowd. Two devourers had never hunted the same offering before. This was not part of the ritual. Coalition commanders shouted orders, trying to regain control, but the monsters did not respond. For the first time, the devourers were acting on their own. Elias swore quietly. He backed away, guiding Saralyn toward a tunnel opening carved into the pit wall. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for him to fit. They rushed inside just as claws slammed into the stone behind them. The tunnel was dark and uneven, lit only by faint glowing veins in the walls. Elias activated his suit lights and kept moving. The devourers tried to follow, but their size worked against them. One forced an arm inside, claws scraping, but could not fit through. Elias fired at the arm. The creature withdrew with an angry roar. For a brief moment they were safe. Saralyn leaned against the wall, shaking. She looked up at Elias, her eyes wide. She did not know his words, but she understood his actions. He had come back for her. He had risked his life for a stranger. She placed a trembling hand against her chest and then pointed at him, making a simple sound of gratitude in her language. Elias nodded once. "You're welcome," he said softly, though he knew she might not understand. The ground shook again. The devourers were not giving up. They began tearing at the tunnel entrance, ripping stone free piece by piece. Dust filled the air. The tunnel would not hold forever. Elias looked deeper into the tunnel. His scanner showed an open chamber ahead, larger and more complex. He made a decision quickly. "Come on," he said, gesturing forward. They ran again. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern filled with broken machinery and ancient structures. Long ago, someone had tried to build something here: containment systems, power conduits, weapons. All of it was destroyed. Elias smiled grimly. "Someone else tried to solve this problem," he murmured. "Guess they didn't finish." The devourers forced their way into the chamber, their massive bodies shaking the ground. They moved with more caution now, spreading out, trying to surround him. Elias activated his suit's external speakers. Above the pit, his voice echoed through the chamber and up to the surface. "Attention, Coalition," he said calmly. "You're watching this, so listen carefully. These things aren't gods, they're tools, and tools can break." Coalition officials froze. A human was addressing them directly, from inside the pit. Elias moved among the ruins, placing charges, rerouting broken power lines, dragging old machinery into position. He worked fast, his movements efficient and confident. Saralyn watched, slowly understanding that he was not acting randomly. He was building something out of nothing. One devourer charged. Elias waited until the last second, then leapt aside. The creature crashed into a weakened support pillar. Elias fired, detonating the charge. The ceiling partially collapsed, pinning the devourer beneath tons of stone and metal. It screamed. The sound echoed through the pit, sharp and metallic. Above, the crowd fell silent. The devourers had never screamed like that before. The second devourer hesitated. Elias stood between it and Saralyn, weapon raised, breathing hard but steady. "You feel that," he said quietly. "That's fear. Welcome to it." The devourer backed away slightly, its glowing eyes flickering as it recalculated. Saralyn realized then that the stories were wrong. The devourers were not unstoppable. They were just used to winning. The pit shook again, but this time the monsters did not advance. Far above, the coalition's perfect ritual had turned into something they could not control. A human had entered the pit. And the monsters were learning that humans did not play by the rules. The devourer that was still free did not attack right away. It stayed near the edge of the chamber, its heavy body rising and falling as it processed what had just happened. Its glowing eyes shifted between Elias, the trapped devourer, and the ruined machines around them. It was thinking. Elias did not waste the moment. He moved quickly, pulling Saralyn farther back into the chamber, away from open paths. He placed her behind a thick wall of broken metal and stone. "Stay here," he said gently, pressing his hand flat against the wall to show her what he meant. "No matter what happens." Saralyn nodded. She did not fully understand his words, but she understood his meaning. She trusted him now more than anything else in this place. The trapped devourer thrashed under the rubble, tearing at stone with grinding force. Each movement shook the chamber. Elias knew it would free itself eventually. He had minutes at best. He scanned the area again. Old power conduits ran along the walls, cracked but still faintly active. Energy leaked from them in unstable pulses. The coalition had once tried to build a control system here, and it had failed. But failed systems could still be useful. Elias smiled slightly. The free devourer moved again, slower this time. It circled wide, trying to flank him. Elias mirrored its movement, always keeping himself between it and Saralyn. Above the pit, coalition leaders argued loudly. Some demanded the feeds be shut down. Others wanted weapons deployed into the pit. But no one agreed on what to do. The devourers were not obeying, and the human was still alive. Elias fired a shot, not at the devourer but at the floor near one of the energy lines. The blast cracked the stone and exposed the glowing conduit beneath. Sparks flew into the air. The devourer reacted instantly, leaping backward. It remembered pain. It remembered the collapse. It understood danger. "Good," Elias muttered. "You're learning." The devourer roared and charged anyway. Elias ran toward it instead of away. At the last second, he slid across the ground, firing upward into the conduit overhead. The line burst, flooding the chamber with blinding light. Energy surged wildly, arcing across metal and stone. The devourer slammed into the unstable field. Its armor absorbed some of the energy, but not all. It stumbled, movements jerky and uncoordinated. Elias did not stop. He kept moving, dragging cables free, redirecting power, turning the broken chamber into a maze of danger zones. The trapped devourer finally tore itself free with a massive roar. It climbed out of the rubble, damaged but furious. Its movements were slower now, one limb clearly injured. Two devourers again. But this time they hesitated. Saralyn watched from behind cover, her fear slowly turning into something else. She saw patterns. She saw the human predict where the monsters would move. She saw him lead them, not chase them. She picked up a loose piece of metal and struck it against the ground, making noise. One devourer turned toward the sound. Elias glanced back and saw what she had done. He nodded once, approving. "Good," he said, "just like that." The devourers split their attention. That was all Elias needed. He triggered another charge, collapsing a section of floor beneath one of them. The creature fell into a lower chamber, crashing through ancient structures. The remaining devourer roared in rage and rushed Elias directly. Elias stood his ground. He waited until it was close enough that he could feel the heat from its body. Then he jumped sideways, fired his grappling line into the creature's armor, and yanked himself upward, swinging over its head. As he passed above it, he dropped a final charge directly onto its back. He landed hard, rolled, and sprinted. The explosion did not kill the devourer, but it did something worse. It damaged the control systems built into its body. The devourer staggered, roaring in confusion. Its movements became erratic. It slammed into walls, tore at its own armor, unable to stabilize itself. Above, Coalition scientists stared at the data feeds in horror. The devourers were not natural creatures. They were machines designed to learn, to adapt, to enforce fear. And the human had found their weakness. Elias moved back towards Saralyn, staying alert. The second devourer climbed back up from the lower chamber, slower now, more cautious. Both monsters kept their distance. For the first time since the pit had been created, the devourers were retreating, not fleeing, but choosing not to engage. Elias lowered his weapon slightly, breathing hard. He did not chase them. He understood predators well enough to know when to stop pushing. Saralyn stepped out from behind cover and approached him slowly. She placed her hand lightly on his arm, a silent question in her eyes. Elias looked at her and smiled tiredly. "We're still alive," he said. "That's a good start." The devourers backed deeper into the pit, disappearing into the shadows. The chamber fell quiet, broken only by the hum of damaged machinery and the distant echoes of their movement. Above the pit, no one spoke. The ritual was completely shattered now. The offering still lived. The monsters had withdrawn, and the humans stood unbroken. Coalition authority cracked in that moment. Saralyn looked up at the open space above, where light from the surface filtered faintly down. For the first time, she thought, the pit feels smaller than hope. Elias checked his remaining supplies. Ammo was low. Power reserves were unstable. He knew this was not over. The coalition would react. The devourers would adapt again. But something had changed that could not be undone. Fear had shifted sides. A human had entered the pit. And the monsters had learned that humans do not just survive. They push back. The pit stayed quiet for a long time. Elias did not trust the silence. He stood still, listening, his weapon lowered but ready. The air was heavy with heat and dust, and the broken machines around them hummed softly as damaged energy lines slowly cooled. Somewhere far below, the devourers moved, but they did not come back. Saralyn stood beside him now instead of hiding. Her hands were shaking, but her back was straight. She looked at the darkness where the monsters had vanished, then up toward the distant light far above. "They left," she said softly in her own language. Elias did not understand the words, but he understood the feeling. He nodded once. "For now," he replied. Above the pit, chaos ruled. Coalition leaders argued in loud, frightened voices. Ritual masters demanded the sacrifice be completed. Military commanders warned that firing heavy weapons into the pit could damage the devourers or, worse, free them completely. No one had prepared for this outcome. The pit was never supposed to be challenged. And yet, a single human had done exactly that. Elias activated his suit's external speakers again. "Coalition command," he said calmly. "This ends now. You're not throwing anyone else down here." His voice echoed up the walls of the pit and across the watching city. Millions were listening now. The feeds had spread beyond the colony. Other worlds were watching too. A Virelian official answered, trying to sound calm. "Human, you have interfered with a lawful process. Withdraw immediately. The offering will be completed." Elias looked down at Saralyn, then back up. "No," he said simply. The word hit harder than any weapon. "No," he repeated. "You don't get to call this law anymore." The official threatened consequences. sanctions, military response. Elias let him talk. When the voice finally stopped, Elias spoke again. "You built monsters to scare your people into obedience," he said. "You told everyone they were unstoppable so no one would question you. But I just walked into your pit. I survived. And your monsters backed away." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Your fear system is broken." All across coalition space, people listened. Workers, soldiers, entire species who had lived under the same threat. They saw the data, the wounded devourers, the humans still standing. Belief cracked. Down in the pit, Elias turned his attention back to the problem in front of him. Getting out. His ship was damaged. He had no lift system strong enough to climb straight up the pit walls, but the old structures gave him ideas. He began working again, linking cables, powering ancient lift rails, rerouting energy in careful bursts. It was slow, dangerous work. One mistake could bring the ceiling down. Saralyn stayed close, helping when she could. She carried tools, held cables steady, warned him when energy levels spiked. They did not need many words. Trust had already replaced language. Hours passed. The devourers did not return. At last, one of the old platforms shuddered to life. It rose slowly, grinding against stone, barely stable but functional. Elias tested it once, then nodded. "This will do," he said. They stepped onto the platform together. As it began to rise, the pit seemed to breathe around them as if the world itself was watching. The walls slid past, glowing veins fading as they climbed higher. When they finally emerged at the surface, light flooded over them. The crowd stood frozen. Soldiers raised weapons, unsure whether to fire. Officials backed away. No one moved to stop them. They were staring at something impossible. The offering had returned, alive, and beside her stood a human covered in dust, armor scarred, posture unbroken. Saralyn stepped forward first. The restraints that once marked her for death were gone. She looked small against the massive crowd, but she did not bow. Elias stood beside her. "This ends," he said again, louder now, without speakers. "Right now." For a long moment no one answered. Then something unexpected happened. A worker near the front stepped away from the crowd. Then another, and another. They did not cheer. They simply refused to stand in line anymore. Across the colony, people began to move. The coalition soldiers slowly lowered their weapons. The ritual grounds emptied. That day, no new offering was chosen. Saralyn was taken under human protection. Coalition leaders protested, but their words carried no weight anymore. Too many had seen the truth. Elias repaired his ship over the following days with help from locals who no longer feared punishment. Supplies arrived, then messages from human space, then ships. Humanity did not come as conquerors. They came as witnesses. The coalition tried to reassert control elsewhere, but the pit had been their greatest symbol. Without it, fear spread the wrong way, upward. Saralyn chose to leave with the humans. She stood at the edge of the landing field, watching her world one last time. It looked smaller now, less powerful, less final. Elias stood beside her. "You don't have to come," he said gently. She looked up at him and shook her head. "I want to live," she said in simple shared words she had learned quickly. "Not just survive." Elias smiled. "Yeah," he said, "that's kind of our thing." The human ship lifted off, rising into the sky without resistance. Across coalition space, stories spread. Not about human weapons, not about human strength, but about a human who saw a child thrown to monsters and decided that was unacceptable. About a species that did not ask permission to do the right thing. The devourers still lived in the pit, wounded and cautious, but they were no longer worshipped. They were no longer feared. They were watched, and somewhere in the darkness below, the monsters remembered something they had never needed before. That sometimes prey steps back, and sometimes it refuses to stay afraid.